Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Heidi from My Reading Life, and I'm here today to film my final wrap-up for the month of September. Or I should say, my final review of books that I've read that I have not yet talked about. So I have 5 books here to talk about, and I mean, this has been overall an extremely successful month of reading for me. I've read a total of 25 books in the month of September, which is far beyond what I ever thought I would have read for this month because it was a busy month. But like we've talked about before, there have been some weather-related things that have happened that have freed me up for some reading time. So let's just talk about these books, shall we? The first book that I hadn't yet wrapped up for you was a book I finished earlier this month, and this is the presidential biography of Woodrow Wilson, entitled Wilson by A. Scott Berg. It is huge. I've been reading it for several months. I ended up finishing this book up as a combination audiobook and print copy, and I think that was a really good choice for me. I really enjoyed listening to this on audiobook. I think it was well done. Woodrow Wilson was a very interesting president. He had a lot of very particular ideals that he stood by throughout his political career, and he came from a very different place than most people had come from up to that time into the presidency. He had been in academia, he had been a professor, he had been president of Princeton University, and had been sort of headhunted by the party in New Jersey, the Democratic Party in New Jersey, to run for governor, and from that leapt into the bid for president. He had, like I said, he had a lot of ideals. He was president during World War I, and he was very instrumental in the peace talks after World War I had ended. So I think that there are a lot of good things you can say about Woodrow Wilson, but you also have to take the bad with that good and know that he was a product of his generation. He was raised as a Southern white gentleman, and so he had a lot of those racist ideologies that were common from his generation and his social class at that time. So yeah, very interesting presidential biography. I can recommend this particular one if you're looking to read a biography on Woodrow Wilson. And then another book I'm just going to briefly touch on because I've got a full review up on my channel for this. This is Every Day the River Changes, 4 Weeks Down the Magdalena by Jordan Salama. This was the Book Naturalist Book Club pick for the month of September, and this qualifies for Shorty September. This is 208 pages of text. So if you're looking for a short book, nature writing, or travelogue type book, this one definitely fits the bill. Please check out my review video for this book if you're interested in learning more about what it's about. And then another one that does not fit the bill for Shorty September, this is A World on the Wing by Scott Weidensaul. This is a science nonfiction all about migratory birds. This book details the author's time spent participating in research on migratory birds and also just different interesting things and projects that he's learned about over the course of many decades. I picked this book up at this time, even though it's been on my TBR for a while now, because the author is going to be coming to Maine to give a talk about his work and his book next Tuesday night, and I wanted to have read this book before I listened to that. So I thought this was an excellent science nonfiction. I was really engaged with this throughout. I listened to it mostly on audiobook, although I did flip back and forth between the print copy and the audiobook. So many interesting stories, so much that I did not know about what we know about the science of migration. He goes through each chapter, sort of takes on a different migratory pathway throughout the world. So we have bits in here that are about Alaska, some stuff from China, other things in Africa, India, South America, even the east coast of the US. There's a section in here that talks about my little part of the world and the red phalaropes, which disappeared from their migratory staging area in Passamaquoddy Bay in the 80s and 90s, and I very much remember that happening, and it was in the newspapers locally, and it was much discussed amongst those of us that work in the sort of marine environmental field. And yeah, so this was just fascinating, really interesting people, really interesting research. The stuff in here about how the technology has changed over the years that has allowed us to learn more about where these birds go and the types of journeys that they're making. I did not know that you can use the Doppler weather radar to see bird migrations. So in the spring and the fall, particularly in North America, when birds are passing overhead in great numbers during the nighttime, which we never see, you can actually look at the Doppler weather radar, and the pattern that you see on the radar can be migratory birds passing by in the thousands. I mean, just fascinating. There's some stuff in here about huge concentrations of raptors in different parts of the world. Fascinating. The impacts of our agricultural system on migratory birds. Heartbreaking. Just so much in here. Lots in here about poaching and hunting of migratory birds and songbirds in particular that I didn't even know was happening in the world, because it's illegal in North America to hunt songbirds, but in other parts of the world it is not. So if that's the kind of thing that bothers you, I will give you a little heads up that in this book there are some really, really awful descriptions of things that happen to birds in terms of being hunted and netted and trapped and that sort of thing that were really difficult to read about. So just be warned on that if that's something that you just don't like to read about. The last couple of chapters of this book really go into a lot of depth about that. But I really thought this was a great book, and I learned a lot, and I'm really glad that I picked it up and read it. And then these last two books also fit the bill for Shorty September. Let's do them in order. So I picked up on a whim Octavia E. Butler's Mind of My Mind, which is in the second book in the Patternist series. I had read the first book in this series, which is called Wild Seed. I read that like the beginning of the year and meant to read this one pretty soon thereafter, and just never got around to it for whatever reason, and then just felt like reading a sci-fi book this week. So I picked this one up one afternoon and just blew through the whole thing in one day. So this is the story of a young woman who has some interesting mind powers, and that's because of her heritage and her ancestry, which some of which you will learn about if you had read Wild Seed, and what she does with those powers and how she sort of builds community around this. I don't want to go into the plot of this one too much because it is book 2 in the series, and I think, you know, I really enjoy going to these types of books not knowing very much, but there is, sort of mind control, telekinesis, and other like mind type powers in this series of books. And it's talking, it's using these types of science fictional ideas to discuss things like slavery and oppression and genetics and what gets handed down through the generations. And I just think that Octavia Butler is a genius, and I think she tells a really fantastic story. And some of the stuff is just super weird, but also like very engaging and made me want to keep turning the pages. So I'm really glad I picked this one up off the shelf for Shorty September, and I'm not going to let so much time pass before I pick up my next Butler book, that's for sure. And then last but not least, I read this middle grade book, The Skin I'm In by Sharon G. Flake, also counts for Shorty September. This is a book I've had on the shelf for about a year, and this tells the story of Malika, who is in 7th grade and is teased by her classmates and people in her community for the skin color that she has. She has very black skin, and she gets teased a great deal. She's also bullied by some girls in her school and sort of forced to go along with some of their schemes. And it's all about a young girl, these preteen type age group, 12, 13, 14, that age group, trying to figure out where, how she wants to live and who she is and where she fits in. A new teacher comes to the school, and the teacher has a birthmark on her face, and but seems to be perfectly fine with it and perfectly comfortable with it, even though the kids are making fun of her and like calling her names and things like that. She's very sure of herself, and she sort of starts to help Malika look at herself in a different way and sort of be positive about her strengths and not to worry so much about what other people think. And I thought it was a really good story. It sends a really good message. It is a young person's book, so, it is a little simplified, I think, but I think in terms of the audience that it's trying to reach, it's doing a very nice job at what it's trying to do. So I'm glad I read this one off the shelf. So that's it. That's 25 books down for the month of September. I feel really great about that. And I'm looking forward to October and just sort of, I'm really not sure what I'm going to get up to in October, but I'm probably going to be reading some bigger books because I pretty much wiped out my entire stack of short books in my TBR, which is a nice problem to have. I hope you're all doing well and finding some great books to read. I'll talk to you later.